Tonight, we journey into the story of America. You move as night gathers over a long coast and a wider interior. A hush carried by cold air and distant surf. Pines lean and the sea breathes. Snowfields hold a pale glow. A river breaks the silence with thin ice singing as it drifts. In the far north, the sky ripples with lights that fold and unfold like cloth being shaken above a sleeping camp. You stand there and you listen, and you feel a continent drawing breath through valleys and canyons and swamps, a long exhale that began before names and borders. You might struggle to endure what they once lived through. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening from and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step forward, and the wind answers with the smell of salt, spruce, and distant smoke. The world around you is young in human memory, but old in stone. Great sheets of ice retreat. Valleys open. Rivers carve bold paths to an older ocean. You follow low beaches where kelp beds sway beneath black water, and you follow inland trails where dry grass bends and straight horizons wait with a patience that never tires. Your feet learn the rhythm of the land, a steady cadence across sand, pebble, and firm earth. You walk beside herds that move like a tide. Bison ripple across open country. Caribou pass through willow groves. Mammoth shadows fade into the cold morning and return at dusk along ancient routes. Fire crackles. The scent of fat rises from a stone hearth. You practice a clean silence and a focused attention. A spear point glints in the firelight, fluted along its center to guide the strike and ease the haft. You set it gently upon hide and listen to the soft tapping of people shaping stone with careful blows. Your breath slows. The edge gleams. The camp holds its circle of warmth while night leans in, patient and watchful. You pass a canyon wall where hands leave red shapes, palm and fingers pressed to rock. A chorus of presence that needs no words. A spiral curls beside a line of dots. An antler becomes a carving of a bird with a lifted beak. A circle becomes a sun. A footprint becomes an invitation. The rock face keeps the cold and keeps the memory. Water below speaks with a clear voice as it runs over smooth basalt. The night sky answers, bright with stars that seem close enough to rest in your open hands. You follow the coast when the mountains keep their ice, and you cross the interior when winter loosens its hold. Rafts of logs ride the swells like patient animals. Seal skins dry on driftwood poles. A bone needle slides through a seam. Salmon fillets hang above alder smoke and cedar ash. You travel and you make camp, and you learn the curve of bays and the comfort of coves that hold boats safe from swell and wind. The world becomes a map you feel with your legs and lungs rather than your eyes. You wake to frost that flowers across your hair and lashes. You exhale and a small cloud rises. The morning opens on a plain that carries the low sound of hooves. A child holds a charm carved from shell. A woman binds a bundle of grasses and speaks a name to the dawn. The notes of a song lift from a lodge made of poles and woven mats, a melody that returns each season to welcome the salmon run. A hawk wheels above the marsh. A river mouth greets the sea with a mingling of colors, brown to green to black. The scent of smoke clings to fur and to woven mat. The day grows and you move with it. You pass a place where campfires have come and gone for ages. The sand keeps a scatter of broken shells. The soil holds a deep layer of charcoal that darkens your fingers. People know this bend in the river. They return with each season, with each migration of deer and waterfowl. Stones make a ring where stories gather. Baskets shine with river reed and spruce root. Memory of routes lives like a braided cord, each strand a safe way across hills, another along ridges, another along a chain of sheltered inlets. The cord rests in many hands and never frays. You kneel at a shallow lake where reeds whisper. A stone at your knee is sharper than the rest. You turn it in your hand and feel the ancient pressure that coaxed a blade from a larger heart. The pattern of flakes tells of method and mind. The scars run in a rhythm as sure as the beat beneath your ribs. The blade belongs to a way of living that moves with the seasons and trusts snowmelt and berry and herd. A story rises in your chest. People learn to read the world by listening to it. They follow rivers to their forks, and they follow the taste of wind that comes down from ice and up from sage. The ice retreats, then returns with a sudden chill, then goes again. Rivers swell and change course. A broad bridge of land that once offered dry passage between continents melts into islands and then into open sea. Some arrive along a road of grass and silt. Others glide between headlands from cove to cove in skin boats that ride low and steady. The order of footsteps keeps shifting like light underwater. Camps appear where river meets prairie. Camps appear where spruce forest breaks toward rock and foam. The trace of a meal remains in ash. The echo of a song lingers in a hollow log. The years refuse to line up into a single path, and the silence between trails stays kind and unresolved. You learn the shape of hunger and the fullness that follows a lucky day. You learn the weight of a sleeping child and the ease of a well-sewn seam. You learn a word for the north wind and another for the quiet that falls after a kill has been dressed and hung. You lean against a trunk that smells of resin. You listen for owls and for the shiver of leaves when elk move along a creek. A drum begins, soft as breath, and your steps settle into its beat. The drum becomes the footfall of a people crossing open ground with trust in their own rhythm. This beginning gathers what will later unfold. The land will offer maize and squash. The land will grow cities and mounds. The land will hear bells and drums and hymns and field cries. The land will lift a banner of stars into dark skies. For now you remain with the earliest footprints, where the clean edge of a fluted point shines in firelight and ancient questions rest open. Paths along the coast and across interior valleys both leave their signs, and the order of steps refuses to settle into a single tale. You breathe with the tide and with the slow bends of rivers, and you feel a nation that is not yet named already humming under your feet. Dawn opens over a wide braid of water and mud, and you move along the levees that rise only as high as a person's shoulders, low green backs that keep the river from wandering. The current glitters with bits of mica. A heron lifts, slow and certain, then settles again beside a stand of cane. On the horizon, a rise of earth appears, gentle and deliberate, and beyond it another, and then a flat crown that seems to hold the sky. You walk toward it with the sound of frogs, with the smell of wet clay and new corn, with a hush that belongs to places where many feet have learned the same path. Homes gather in neat clusters of poles and thatch, fire pits glow, and smoke carries the warmth of roasted squash. Paths straighten toward an open square, the size of a calm lake where dancers have pressed the earth smooth. You pass carved posts that share faces of birds and cats and people who wear the sharp gaze of a falcon. Shell beads catch light at wrists and throats. A young player rolls a smooth stone across packed ground, while others send slender sticks gliding after it. A game of precision that steadies hands and quiets breathing. Laughter drifts and fades, then returns like small waves along the bank. The great mound rises ahead, its sides trimmed and true, its top a level stage where leaders meet. You climb by an earthen ramp and pause with your palms on cool clay. Far below, the square fills with people carrying baskets of maize. Yellow kernels shine like small suns. Drummers begin a soft cadence, and a voice starts a chant that belongs to the season's first fruits. A bowl of water from the river waits on a mat of woven cane. You taste steam that smells of cedar. A child lifts a handful of pollen and lets it fall through her fingers, so it sifts like gold rain onto packed earth. At the western edge of the city, a ring of cedar posts circles a clearing. Each post stands with careful spacing, each one set where the builders measured sun and shadow. You move into the circle and stand still. The horizon softens. The sun climbs and rests for a moment in a gap the builders prepared long before this morning. The city breathes with the turning of the year. People come to mark the day, to see the light balance, to begin again. The circle holds its measure like a quiet drum, and you feel time flowing through wood and skin with the same steady patience. The city swells in your sight. New houses rise, then more. Plazas widen. Palisades grow where watchfires burn at dusk. A burst of building and song and arrival makes a new center for many valleys. Traders come by canoe with copper bright as dawn from the northern lakes. Shells from southern shores clink in baskets. Sheets of mica gleam like water. Stone from far flint quarries flashes on belts and in toolkits. A feathered cloak lifts in the breeze at the edge of the square. A child traces a pattern from memory in ash, a loop and a bird's eye, and a line that joins earth to sky. A across the eastern woodlands, rivers teach the same lesson in other places. In a valley to the south, a river bends beneath red clay bluffs where other mounds carry houses and shrines. In a land of soft hills, a broad earthwork draws a circle and a long avenue that meets the moon as it climbs on a chosen night. In a green plain, an ancient serpent curls from head to tail along a ridge and faces the place where light returns after winter. Farther west, a long line of mounds keeps company with a river that runs brown and quiet past cottonwoods. Each place listens to sky and water and holds its own order. You pass through a market where gourds rattle and clay whistles trill like birds. Pots show designs that curve like waves and feathers. A carver presses a shell against his thigh and turns it until a falcon's beak and eye begin to shine. A woman smooths a pot's rim with a bit of river pebble and sings under her breath. A boy balances a basket of corn on his head and steps lightly between mats where girls weave with cane and grass. Smoke rises straight and then flows away into shade. Dogs sleep with chins on paws. The square waits for a word from the house on the mound. When the sun falls, the city turns to a warm constellation. Fires burn along lanes and on the terrace tops. You hear a rattle and a stick rhythm from a house where elders sit with bowls in their laps. Stories begin in low voices. A traveler tells of a city farther down the river where a blue stone set in a mask glows like a star. Another tells of painted plates that carry the figure of a man with wings who runs with a spear and a bolt of lightning. A woman speaks of a ceremony when the corn silk first shines and people give thanks with quiet faces and careful steps. The night holds every word like a vessel. One morning, a flood rises higher than any elder remembers. Water takes fences and rattles gourds from rafters and leaves fish shining in the grass when it falls back to the channel. Another year brings hunger when the rain changes its mind. Smoke teaches a stubborn smell to the air from too much clearing of cane and too many fires for too many houses. A wall of poles goes up again where it fell, and then goes up again. Some say the leaders ask for larger gifts than the season can spare. Some say the fields ask for rest that no one can give. The city keeps moving, but the rhythm feels a little less steady underfoot. You stand once more in the cedar circle. The sun still finds its place between posts. The people keep the day with song, yet a small silence lingers in the corners of the square where weeds take root in hard earth. Traders arrive with fewer baskets. Canoes drag a little longer on the bank before they slide free again. The bright copper dishes in the market seem fewer, and the flight of birds along the ridges at evening feels thinner. A child carries the rolling stone of the game and looks for someone to race him across the plaza, then sits and traces lines in dust with a stick until the stone rests without a chase. You follow families as they leave in twos and tens. They carry baskets and tools and seeds. They walk upstream to a quiet terrace where soil stays dark and generous. They head down the valley to join cousins in a town where a smaller square still rings with steady drums. A few stay with the great mound and its broad-top garden and its view over the water meadows. At night, the fires along the palisade burn with the same faithful light, but there are fewer eyes to watch them. The earth keeps its shape, and the sky keeps its calendar, and the city learns a slower breath. The river keeps its old song. Fish flash in shallows. Turtles slide from logs at the sound of your step. A woman scatters ash for a new planting where the river dropped rich silt. A girl picks up a bead that once sat in a necklace and holds it to her ear before tucking it into a pouch. A boy kicks a chunky stone and watches it roll a short distance, then stoops to lift it with both hands. A small shrine at the edge of the fields carries fresh flowers and a feather woven into a wreath of grass. You feel the land itself leaning close to listen. In time, the great square welcomes fewer ceremonies. The cedar posts of the circle tip and sink. The ramp grows soft at its edges, where rain falls in thin sheets. Grass takes the corners. Wind brings the smell of milkweed and wild grape. Every path remains, faint yet faithful, and every terrace holds the memory of feet that wore it smooth. The city returns to the earth that raised it, and the earth keeps the shapes with care. The reasons do not gather into a single story. Water and weather and hunger and choice take turns on the same stage. The mounds keep their quiet, and the river keeps its shining road past their feet. You move away at dusk, across a last footbridge of woven cane. Fireflies spark over the marsh. A drum answers from a far field where a smaller village now lifts its voice. The scent of cornmeal warms a new night. Behind you, the broad mound darkens into the shape of a sleeping guardian. Ahead of you, other towns glow along river bends, each with its own square and its own songs, each with a way of marking time that meets the first light in its chosen place. The wood circles hold the sky in their silence, and the river kingdoms listen for the next season to begin. Night air tastes of salt and tar, and you ride a plank deck that groans with every swell while a bell marks the hours with a patient note. Canvas fills and slackens, ropes creak. The sky opens like a cold cathedral, and the Atlantic heaves under you with a slow strength that ignores every human hope. You sleep in a narrow berth that smells of damp wool, then rise to watch a pale line of coast lift from the morning haze. The shore keeps its distance, then draws near with dunes and long inlets and a chain of low islands that seem to float on their own reflections. You step into sand that squeaks underfoot. Pines bend, grasses comb the wind. A wooden palisade takes shape from trunks cut close to the shore. The first houses sit with their backs to the weather. A small garden tries a stubborn green. The people count barrels. They count nails. They count the days until a ship returns with bread and salt and voices from home. You walk the lanes at dusk and listen to murmurs behind thin walls as a new town tries to lift itself from hunger and fear. Farther down these same islands, another clearing waits. A carving on a post reads a single word that carries the weight of many lives. The sand keeps a few prints, and then the tide erases them. A kettle rusts by a cold hearth. A fence leans with no hand to set it straight. You read the wood and hear the surf and feel the stillness settle. The lost remain lost, and the trees take back the sound of their names. The ocean breathes, steady and indifferent, and the mystery keeps walking beside you without hurry. South of these dunes, a stone watchtower looks over a harbor where palms lift like open hands. A bell calls from a small chapel where limewash glows against the morning. Soldiers oil their matchlocks. Fishermen mend nets and spread them to dry on warm sand. Gardens carry oranges and herbs behind low walls. You follow a road of crushed shell to a mission yard where a friar teaches a hymn in a soft voice while smoke from a cook fire drifts past fig leaves. Far inland, another mission rises in a dry valley where adobe cures in the sun and a thin stream winds through cottonwoods. The bell there answers with its own measured note and keeps a new time for old villages. North again, a river turns brackish as it meets the tide. You enter a marsh that murmurs with insects and the small snaps of crabs at the root of reed and cypress. Boats come to anchor near an island that promises shelter. The year is 1607, and a small company marks out a triangular fort and lays logs across clay that oozes around their boots. The water tastes wrong, half salt and half sweet, and the summer presses down with a heat that steals strength. The winter comes thin and hard. The storehouse grows empty. A cartwheel asks for grease that no one can spare. You move through lanes where men pull at their collars and try to work while the wind cuts to the bone. The river carries more than hunger. It carries greetings and warnings from towns that have known this water for longer than any written memory. You stand in a clearing where gifts pass between hands. Corn shines in baskets. Strands of wampum catch light like a small river frozen into a rope of shell and color. A cloak of deerskin rests on a captain's shoulders. The words do not meet cleanly. The gestures try to bridge what words cannot yet carry. You feel the ground itself hold its breath while two homes of meaning look at one another across the fire. Work begins to find its rhythm. A field turns brown and ready. A well gives fresher water. Timber goes up over new trenches. A plant that loves the sun spreads green leaves along ridges, and a man dries its gold-brown leaf and learns how to coax a market from the soil. A ship carries the smell of that leaf back across the ocean and returns with tools and seed and more hands to share the burden. In a hot summer, a meeting gathers in a wooden church and sets a small lamp in the long corridor of laws. A few weeks later, a ship drops anchor with people stolen from a far coast, and the sound of chains enters the current of the river like a new and heavy note that will never be fully quiet again. You climb to the hill of a northern cape where a storm rakes the shoals and a small ship hunts for a harbor that offers safety and a place to begin. The year is 1620. The vessel lies at anchor in cold water, while those aboard write their names under a promise to bind their lives together for the common good. The ink dries in a cramped cabin. The paper smells of salt and smoke. The promise becomes a coat that everyone must wear, stitched from faith and necessity and the wish to endure. You hold the lantern while a hand places a final stroke across a last letter. Snow meets the first season on shore. The houses stand thin and brave. The fields are stubble and stone. You hear a drum from a nearby village and see smoke lift straight into a sky as clear as glass. A man who has walked oceans with his own history teaches the shape of this soil and the time of this spring. A mound of fish becomes a circle of green. Corn rises. Beans climb. Squash spreads its broad leaves like small sails over dark earth. The scent of wood smoke turns sweet. A harvest gathers in a low light that makes every color deeper. A table grows long in the pale sun while people bring what they can carry. A bird roasts. A basket spills nuts. A pot of stew breathes herbs into the cool air. Friends and watchful strangers share the same quiet hunger for a gentler season. The peace this moment seems to promise does not hold in every year. You still feel the warmth of it on your face, as if the light has traveled all the distance from that field to find you. Rivers to the north keep their own story. White water spits around dark boulders where canoes slide as if born from the current. A town of wooden houses climbs a rock above a broad river, and a new flag lifts in a clean wind. Traders carry pelts that smell of river and winter. Priests write by candle in small rooms and learn words that taste of pine resin and smoke. The cross travels, and with it schools and gardens and grief and hope. The old paths take the weight of new boots. The old songs hear the ring of a bell and answer in their own key. The coastline gathers more clearings. Each one begins with a prayer in a meeting house or a chapel or under open sky while gulls cry across the surf. Each one builds a fence and a small barn and a field that asks for patience. A council speaks in one dialect of law and a council speaks in another. A child learns to read by candle and shapes letters that link lives to promises set far away. A drum answers the bell in the next town, and a horn answers a conch shell along a distant beach. The shore becomes a string of beads. Each one holds light. Each one holds worry. Each one tries to learn which way to turn when the wind shifts. You hold all of this in a slow breath. The lost island keeps its silence. The bell in the southern chapel still measures morning. The palisade in the marsh still leans, but it stands. The paper signed in a cold cabin still carries names that shaped a town. The coast draws a long curve that gathers many homes into a single horizon. The beginnings feel thin at times, yet they hold. A flag will come later. For now, you listen to the surf and the bells and the small voices that promise to keep faith with one another, even when the sea growls and the winter claws at the door. Morning light rinses the shingles of a meeting house, and you walk the common where grass lies beaded with dew. A bell answers the hour from a plain steeple. Benches receive careful footsteps. Hats rest on knees. A silence settles like a lake at dawn. A reader lifts a psalm without ornament. The air holds the grain smell of fresh-cut wood and the faint soot of last night's hearths. You sit among neighbors and feel a town that believes work and worship keep good company. You cross a green kept for Quakers, where shade trees throw soft nets of light across packed paths. The meeting gathers without a pulpit or a robe. Breath becomes the only drum. A woman rises when a word finds her and sits when it leaves. Afterward, people tie aprons, trade loaves, and fold letters for friends downriver. William Penn's plan still guides the neat lines of streets and squares. The promise of tolerance continues its careful work while carts rattle over brick and a newsboy calls his route. From the square, you follow a street toward the harbor. Tar warms and releases its sharp scent. Ropes hang like thick vines along warehouse walls. Kegs roll. Crates thump. A gull scolds from a post. Boston breathes like a beehive. New York answers in a deeper register. Philadelphia spreads a wide grid that invites feet to wander. Charleston replies with the clink of harness and the creak of long wharves. Sailors carry stories salted by distance. The law tries to keep a hand on all this motion. The navigation acts wait in thick books while ink dries in ledgers that prefer a friendlier wind. The Molasses Act of 1733 asks for obedience that few harbors can afford. At night, small sloops slip from coves with lanterns hooded. By morning, they return with sweet cargo for the coastwise trade. A clerk counts barrels. A customs man learns the price of looking away. A field outside town fills with people who hear that a traveling preacher has arrived. He moves from horse to stool and lets his voice carry across grass and stone. The words rise and fall like surf over a bar. Tears shine on faces as if the season has turned. You feel the Great Awakening move from pulpit and pamphlet into bone and breath. The years are the late 1730s and the early 1740s. You return by lantern light. Taverns glow with steady amber. A fiddle keeps a simple reel. Pipes and tankards fog the windows. A captain spreads a chart and taps a finger on a sandbar that will not move for any wish. At the next table, a schoolmaster explains a Latin line to an apprentice who wants a better hand. In a corner, an enslaved cooper rubs his palm and looks toward the door where his wife sells baked yams wrapped in paper. Morning brings paper to your hands. The ink smells of oil and heat. Lines run across the page that defy a governor and defend a printer who stood trial in 1735. Jurors choose to judge the truth of words and not only the letter of a charge. You feel a gate swing on its hinges. Speech moves in the market with a cleaner stride. Sunday returns, and so do you. The minister speaks of liberty within the soul. The merchant hears the word and thinks of liberty beside a ledger. The sailor hears it and thinks of liberty where open water begins. The farmer hears it and thinks of liberty on land cleared by his own hands. The meanings do not meet in a single room. They nod to each other in the street. You stand beneath an elm that spreads generous shade over a corner of Boston. People tie ribbons to its limbs on holidays. Boys sit with legs swinging while they swap scraps of news. No one here calls it a symbol. In another town, a bell cast in London finds its home and rings the air with a mild silver tone. The sound drifts across roofs and settles on a river like a floating ring of light. Words around its crown speak of liberty and make the evening kinder. Not every path holds calm. Fires in New York in 1741 bring arrests and frightened testimony. Rumor moves faster than horses, trials follow, and the city learns how fear can bend a straight plank. You carry this knowledge like a stone in your pocket and feel its weight when crowds grow loud. The streets return to regular hours. The scar remains. At the meeting house, a town votes by lifting hands. A road receives funds for repairs. A teacher gets his pay. A small militia chooses a new sergeant. The clerk writes every line neatly in a book that smells of leather and iron gall. A magistrate closes the cover with 2 fingers, as if to tell the town its word is safe. You carry that memory when you leave the square and step back into the braided noise of trade. The revival does not end with a single season. It returns with new voices and fresh hymns. Sometimes it brings quarrels that split congregations and then sow them again in new patterns. Sometimes it carries mercy that crosses a threshold no one expected. The old ways bend. The old ways hold. A country within the colonies takes a slow breath and learns a posture that prefers listening and choosing to a command sent from a distant desk. In the evenings, sailors sit on bollards and tell how close a squall came to sweeping them clean. Farmers tap ash from their pipes and tell how a frost spared the late corn. Widows close shutters and tie the string with the same knot they have always used. Life gathers into these small acts and into words printed by candle on a sheet that will wrap fish in the morning. The line where private devotion becomes public courage stays hidden. You lie awake in a garret above a shop where burlap sacks breathe the scent of coffee and cacao. Wheels groan on cobbles. A patrol calls the hour. The tide changes and drags a wet line down the pilings. A future nation turns slowly like a ship working free of an eddy. Whether the turn begins with the hush of a Quaker room or with the sly swing of a harbor rope remains an open riddle. You walk narrow streets where crates and hogsheads stack like small fortresses, and the smell of tea leaves mingles with tar and brine. A notice tacked to a post curls in the damp, its words sharp as a flint edge. In counting houses, men bend over ledgers and feel a heat that is not from the hearth. Coins click. Pens scratch. The Stamp Act arrives, and the paper in those ledgers asks for a price that stings. Meetings grow crowded. A calm voice calls for petitions. A louder voice calls for a crowd. You stand beneath an elm that once kept only summer shade and now carries a quiet courage. Ropes climb its branches with lanterns tied high. The tree becomes a place where people decide how far patience can bend. Ships rock at their moorings, while customs men carry keys that open more than doors. A barrel breaks open, and molasses rolls thick and sweet across planks that shine with salt. Boys run with pails. A drummer learns a new rhythm that rises from lanes and alleys. Spinning circles gather in parlors where women turn flax and wool into homespun cloth and lift a cause that fits on the body. A small badge sewn to a sleeve says more than a speech. The tap rooms fill from dusk until the moon sets, and talk moves from complaint to plan. You can hear the plan in the hush when a name is spoken. A winter night draws near with a brittle edge. Soldiers and townsmen share a narrow street where tempers carry their own powder. Snowballs turn heavy with grit. Shouts carry. A line of red coats lifts muskets that have seen other ports. The volley is short. The street cracks open and then closes again with the sound of boots and tears. The town wakes the next day to prints in the slush and a new understanding of how quickly words can turn hard. Bells ring. A trial follows with lighted windows late into the night. Arguments try to lift justice above fury. The page that records the verdict carries the clean hand of a man who believes law must stand when fear knocks at the door. Casks of tea sit under guard while clocks argue with a deadline. A meeting swells until breath itself seems scarce. The harbor waits beyond the door, black and wind-streaked. Night carries you to the wharves where boards creak and a wave slaps with a sound that belongs to cold. Figures move with brisk steps and a practiced silence. Knives flash to cut cords, lids rise, chests tumble and break. Tea turns the water brown, then darker still. The harbor exhale feels like a promise kept. Morning brings the smell of leaves and salt. The act has the sound of wood, iron, and water rather than speeches. Ships later bring the weight of punishment. Ports close, troops arrive, doors bar and then open to searchers. A city learns that hunger can ride with principle. Wagons roll from other towns with flour and grain. The road itself feels like a stitched seam that pulls the colonies closer together. Committees write letters and carry news faster than river ice breaks in spring. You hold a thin sheet that travels from farm to port in a day and a night, each mile shortening the distance between distant kitchens. In Philadelphia, lamp flames steady in iron brackets along a street that smells of ink and horse. A hall of brick opens its long room to delegates who carry hopes folded into their coats. The First Continental Congress gathers and sends a message that tries to fit many accents into one voice. The benches hold men who love trade, and men who love fields, and men who love the quiet of a meeting for worship. They stand for the same prayer and sit with different answers in mind. The room keeps their work like a chest that refuses to spill its contents before they are ready. In April of a new year, a road out of Boston meets dawn with frost in the grass and a line of neighbors who do not plan to become a story. The green lies small between tavern and meeting house. Feet shift, eyes watch. A muzzle flash in the gray light breaks the morning. Smoke drifts and will not part to reveal a single hand that began the fight. The day widens into a long run along stone walls and farm lanes where powder burns out of barrels and breath burns out of chests. The road itself seems to lift underfoot with the pounding of a people who decide they will not give it up. Earthworks rise on a hill that looks across water and roofs. The soil is sandy and stubborn. Men dig with shovels that shine under moonlight. Morning climbs and red lines form below. The first volley answers, then another. Powder runs low, and a command passes that saves shots for close work. The hill keeps its place even when bodies fall back, and the lesson settles that standing firm can change a day even when the top of the hill is lost. Smoke hangs like a curtain long after the guns go quiet. The smell of salt grass returns only slowly. A tall Virginian arrives at camp and receives a commission that makes his step heavier. He moves among tents that sag after rain and pauses where a pot boils thin. He carries patience as if it were a tool. He learns which road will hold a cannon and which road will swallow it. He learns which officers steady men and which ask for a quiet word in a tent with the flap tied shut. A bridge of logs across a creek becomes a symbol when the army crosses it without complaint. The siege tightens. The harbor stares back with an empty look that begins to blink. In a small shop, a thin book slides from a press with words that set the sky closer. Common sense travels like a spark in dry grass. You feel the sentences catch in the chest with a quick rise and a longer exhale. People speak those lines at wells and in market lanes, and at river ferries, where horses stamp and steam rises from nostrils. The words make the leap from private thought to public vow. Summer gathers heat in a city of brick and shade trees. Windows stand open in the hall, where delegates listen for a sentence that will carry into the hardest seasons. Quills scratch, ink dries. A new declaration reads like a prayer and a promise at once. Outside, a crowd fills the yard. A bell in the steeple nearby lifts its voice, a clear ring that carries a line about liberty cast into its metal long before this day. The sound settles on hats and shoulders and curls around brick corners before floating down to the river with a faint echo. The words cross fields and marshes and busy corners of port towns. A regiment reads them aloud while drums stand quiet against thighs. A girl sews a small flag for her windowsill and ties it with a blue ribbon. A man who owns no land holds the paper and tilts it toward the light. An enslaved woman hears the words and measures them against the heavy key her owner keeps in his pocket. A loyalist folds a coat and decides that his road leads toward a ship rather than a square. The private measure of each choice remains hard to weigh, even when the public record stays neat. Winter brings the rattling sound of ice along a river that cuts a path like a dull knife. A column moves with wrapped feet and tight jaws. Oars scrape, boats bump. Snow takes prints and wind tries to steal them. A sudden burst of drum and fife splits the gray, and a small town awakens to a nation choosing its next breath. The victory is not large on a map, but it feels large in a heart that had known too much retreat. Fires that night give a calmer heat. The next morning, smoke rises straighter. News drifts from Europe like a long swell that finally reaches shore. A king across the water grows impatient to end the quarrel. Another crown decides that an enemy already known is easier to face than a new force alone. An alliance forms. Ships with strange uniforms step from their wakes into American harbors. Flags that once met as rivals on distant seas now share the same wind along a new coast. A toast clinks in a tent, and a map gains new roots. Across these seasons, the cause collects songs and emblems and kitchen rituals that make a home out of hardship. A sprig of green in a hat band, a homespun ribbon at a child's throat, a scrap of broadside pasted inside a chest lid. Small things hold courage in place when words grow thin. You feel the quiet of those objects even now, as if their colors refuse to fade. You leave this chapter with the sense of a fuse that burns not to an explosion, but to a light that widens. The first spark came from many places at once. A tree gave shade that became resolve. A wharf gave planks that became a stage. A hall gave silence that became a sentence. The exact moment when a people crossed from grievance to birth refuses to sit still on any single day. The shore still smells of tea and salt and smoke, and the air still keeps a faint ring of a bell that asks you to listen for what comes next. Smoke from last campfires of the war thins into the pale light of a new morning, and you walk roads that no longer echo with the roll of field guns. A treaty written in 1783 settles like quiet snow across fields that have known too many footprints. Flags fold, barns open, and weary men return to fences that need mending. The sound in the land changes from drum to hammer, from musket to plow, from orders shouted in lines to names spoken at doorways. The young republic breathes through 13 rooms that do not yet share a steady hallway. Each room keeps its own coins, its own taxes, its own temper. The Articles of Confederation sit on a table that creaks under unpaid bills. A captain who marched in winter waits on the steps of a statehouse for money that will not come. Across the interior, a different possibility appears as Congress maps new townships in fresh squares and sets aside schools and civic space in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. You feel a promise shaped with ruler and compass even while older promises fray. Winter grips the hills of Massachusetts with a hard hand. Courthouses stand under gray skies while farmers gather in worn coats. Hooves stamp, frost squeaks under boot heel. Doors close against petitions, so doors are opened by force. The snow carries the sound of a drum beaten with the flat of a hand. Powder is not plentiful, courage is. Militia meet militia in cold light. The rebellion breaks, yet its echo rises in every chamber where lawmakers sit with numb fingers. You sense a thought crossing many minds at once, a thought that the roof needs stronger beams if the house is to hold. Spring brings you to Philadelphia, a city of brick and horse sweat and warm bread at dawn. Windows of the State House stay shut against curious ears while the heat builds in the long room. Candles gutter, quills scratch. A general sits at the front in a chair with a carved sun above his head. People wonder whether the carving is rising or setting. Arguments fill the air with the tang of ink and the musk of wool coats. Big states want weight, small states want equal standing, and both want security for their neighbors at home. The talk stretches into evening until two chambers take shape, one for equal state voices, one for the head count of the people. Another question moves like a troubled current beneath the polished boards. Lives held in bondage stand in the room without a chair. The ledger that counts representation and taxes records a fraction that wounds the page. Ships that cross the ocean with chained cargo will not be barred by federal law until a future year, written into the text. A promise of return for an escaped person passes from pen to parchment. The sentences aim at union and leave a sorrow that will travel. At last, a preamble rises, simple and grand. You lean close to the first words, "We the people," and feel the room itself pause. The stroke of each letter seems to reach past 13 rooms toward a single hearth. The paper passes from hand to hand for signatures. Wax seals the bundle. When the doors open, warm air and street noise sweep in, and you step out with the delegates into a city that does not yet know what will follow. Rivers carry the news outward in packets that smell of lamp oil. Town greens hear readings that stir the air like a slow breeze before a summer storm. Some nod with guarded trust. Others demand a list of rights that no later Congress may lean against. In New York and Virginia, printers set new type for essays signed with the name of an ancient Roman. The arguments turn crisp and quick, page answering page, until even tavern boys know that the fate of the plan turns on promises. The promises arrive with careful craftsmanship. In the first Congress, James Madison lifts 10 amendments that feel like locks fitted to a new chest. Speech and press receive space to breathe. Assemblies gain shelter. Homes receive their threshold. Trials find their proper room. The ink dries in 1791, and a Bill of Rights moves from paper into daily habit. You sense shoulders across the land loosen by a small degree, the way a craftsman relaxes when a joint seats cleanly. Before those words receive their final polish, the country has already chosen a leader. April of 1789 dawns in New York with spring mist along the harbor and flags fluttering from windows. You join a crowd below a balcony where George Washington lifts his hand and takes an oath with a gravity that quiets even the restless. Church bells answer. Cannon bloom with smoke along the water. Some remember a phrase added at the end and carry that memory forward as a family keepsake that may or may not match the exact moment. The day remains bright in recollection, whether the words were spoken or only felt. A government learns its gait. Departments form around the president like rooms built onto a sturdy frame. A treasury gathers ledgers and a mind that loves numbers. A state office gathers maps and letters from distant capitals. A war office stacks reports from frontier posts. Congress creates a Supreme Court and seats justices whose black robes carry the faint smell of wool and lamp smoke. Riders carry writs along muddy roads. The law begins to speak in a new voice that still remembers the accent of earlier charters. Money presses its claim. Alexander Hamilton walks with a quick step through streets that smell of rain and ink and works to tie the credit of the nation to a future that will attract ships and tools and skill. Debts are assumed. Old notes change hands. A bank receives a charter and raises a columned facade. In another house, Thomas Jefferson reads the plan and tastes too much central spice in the stew. The difference does not break the table, though it tests it. Over a quiet dinner, a bargain takes shape that places the federal city upon the Potomac in return for a vote that steadies the ledger. Surveyors cross meadows where whippoorwills call it dusk. A French artist imagines broad avenues and a hill for a dome that will not rise for years. Stone quarries begin to answer. Not every measure rests easily. An excise on distilled spirits pushes hard against thin margins in the western hills. Corn becomes whiskey that does not spoil on the trail, and a tax on that barrel feels like a hand at the throat. Gatherings turn loud. Posts carry notices scorched by torches. The government replies with a mounted force that wets bridles in mountain streams and enters quiet valleys with flags held straight. The fires die down. The lesson that law will be carried by more than words settles without triumph. Across the ocean, storms of a different kind turn streets into theaters of upheaval. Trade and honor pull in opposite directions. A treaty crafted to cool one quarrel reaches American wharves and draws hiss and cheer in equal measure. Effigies burn in some towns. Merchants count the safety it buys and nod. The young nation keeps peace a little longer than anger wished. Years gather, and the first president writes a farewell that reads like counsel from a porch at sundown. Beware the heat of factions. Keep free hands when old powers beckon across the sea. Let the Union be the river that carries every boat. The words move from printers to parlors and from parlors to memory. The general who would not be king returns to his fields. A peaceful transfer approaches, and the world notices that the chair at the front of the room can be taken by another without blood on the floorboards. On coins and seals, the eagle spreads wings and holds olive and arrows and turns its gaze toward the branch. 13 stars form a small constellation above its head. Children trace those stars with a finger while a teacher explains their meaning. The sound of a national heartbeat grows easier to hear. It moves through courthouses where juries listen, through post roads where riders change horses, through workshops where lathes sing, through kitchens where mothers read aloud by candle. The meaning of the opening words of the Constitution remains larger than any one town can finish. As if the phrase keeps opening, like a window no one has fully raised. The sun on the chair in Philadelphia still glows in the mind, and the day still feels like it might be rising. You follow a road that climbs from river fog into dry light, and wagon hoops tick like slow clocks while oxen lean against their yokes. Surveyors move ahead with chains that flash when the sun finds them, set a stake, lift a sighting glass, and mark a square that will one day hold a school and a well and a shade tree where children rest at noon. The land opens, then opens again, prairies like a calm sea under sky that never seems to end. A riverboat whistle carries upriver with a long, low vowel as steam breathes from a stack, and the hull shoulders through brown water that smells of silt and willow. A map expands on a table in 1803. Pens scratch, and a vast interior passes from one set of hands to another for coin and promise. You feel the room tilt a little with the size of it. The Mississippi receives the news with its steady muscle and carries it past towns that have slept under French roofs and Spanish roofs, and now watch a new flag lift in morning wind. The next spring, 2 young officers push a keelboat into current and begin to read a continent by oar and by foot, and by the kindness of those who know the bends already. You move with them through cottonwood shade and into grass that hides elk to the shoulder, drink from cold springs that taste of stone, and look west from a ridge where mountains pile like thunder paused in the act of forming. Timber camps wake early along tributaries where saws sing and logs roll like sealed thunder. The river makes a road where no wheel could pass during flood, and towns bloom along its banks with levees and warehouses and bells that call shift changes. In cabins on distant ridges, quilts grow under lamps, stars stitched in blue and red that echo the small constellation on the flag. A winter count painted on buffalo hide turns another circle in a lodge where stories keep the years in order while wind combs the grass outside. The sound of a fife floats from a drill field beside a new courthouse, bright against the smell of linseed and wet clay. On another horizon, a republic declares itself under a cedar sky. A mission bell rings in San Antonio. A small church becomes a fort and then becomes a memory kept in stone and in voices that soften when they speak its name. Riders carry news across mesquite and river, and independence reaches distant ranches with dust on its boots. Years later, the star that once stood alone joins the banner in the Capitol, and the border brings a line of soldiers who cook coffee until it turns black and strong, while coyotes call from dry draws. The taste of that coffee lingers when you fold the news sheet that says the line has moved again. Meanwhile, wagons turn northwest in long files that leave twin scars in the sod. Iron rims bite prairie grass, then sage, then the rise of mountain passes, where animals steam in the cold and drivers talk to them as if prayer and command are the same breath. Ferries creak across milk-green water. The blue mountains lift like an old wave. Creeks glitter and vanish. Graves appear beside gullies and are tucked under cairns with a lock of hair and a button in a small tin. A river song drifts from a campfire, slows and thins into sleep while embers breathe red in the wind. The next day a wheel breaks and is mended with rawhide and patience, and the train moves again with fewer spare parts and more faith. Along another road, soldiers receive orders to move entire nations from valleys where corn stands tall and orchards bloom white. The year is 1838 for one of those marches. Boots and bare feet alike grind dust and then frozen mud along routes that run cold and then run hot. A child presses a page of characters that her father drew and taught, a new alphabet for an old language, to keep the memory of names safe when houses fall behind. Fires at night try to hold warmth against wind that does not listen to sorrow. The path leaves beads and songs and the shape of footprints that rain will soften but cannot unmake. You carry the smell of wet wool and wood smoke and feel how far a home can stretch before it breaks. Back along the middle rivers, a compromise draws a line across a map with a ruler edge, a tidy mark that tries to keep two tempers from touching. Town meetings read the words and move on with chores. The mark looks neat under lamplight and grows blurry in weather. Territories become states and stars multiply in the canton of the flag. School children trace them with a finger and learn the order by a tune that sounds cheerful in the classroom, while adults keep a quieter ledger of what the balance costs when it meets real ground and real breath. To the northwest, forests of spruce and fir stand like a choir along rain-fed slopes. A boundary with another empire settles at a parallel that looks straight on a chart and meanders through living country, where salmon run and fog braids itself through cedar. Traders who once saluted different flags now nod under the same, and a river mouth where canoes have gathered for generations holds both schooners and paddles in the same gray water. The coast answers with its cold perfume of kelp and resin and wet rock, as if to say that paper can draw a line the tides will ignore. War comes on dust and trumpet along the southern border, and a road of supply runs from the Gulf to dry valleys where mesquite smokes in cook fires and mules stamp at lines of ants. Siege guns speak, then are silent. A treaty spreads neat signatures across a bundle of pages in 1848. The map shifts again. Rivers that once were edges become braided threads within. Missions that once faced the setting sun as the edge of a world now sit inland by a long, warm ride. Adobe holds the day's heat and lets it go by slow degrees after dark. A serape thrown over a chair keeps the memory of another flag without saying a word. A few months later, a flake of metal winks in a mill race in the Sierra foothills, and the news rides faster than any mail ever did. Pans clatter in creeks so cold they burn. Tents rise and fall like the tides. A language of hope and hunger grows beside sluices and rocker boxes, and claims that stretch from waterline to stake. Merchants build fortunes with coffee and canvas and shovels, while many who dig leave with little more than callous and stories. A city at a foggy bay goes from quiet to raucous in a single season, and learns the music of hammers against plank and the rattle of coins on counters sticky with spilled molasses. A red silk scarf tied at a miner's throat glows in late light like a small banner of the heart. Across high plains, the bison path narrows. Hides pile in towns that smell of smoke and tannin. Iron rails begin to probe from river landings toward the grass, though the nation has yet to stitch the whole width with steel. Stage stations set out tin cups and a water barrel. Telegraph poles lift a silent script into air where hawks hang and watch. A wagon tongue leans against a fence and carries the teeth marks of the team that pulled it over every rise and every creek. A record more faithful than ink. In the next valley, a trader opens a chest of glass beads that catch sun like drops of rain, and a deal is made with gestures and careful looks that mean more than numbers. You sit at a camp that has no walls except for the circle of wagons and watch embers fall like slow red snow. Someone reads aloud from a small book that crossed an ocean on one journey and now crosses a continent on another. Someone hangs a frying pan on a nail driven into a cottonwood with a ring that will grow inside the tree for 100 seasons. Someone mends a boot and hums a tune from the tidewater, while coyotes keep their own song beyond the last lantern. Night feels wide and kind, and the stars seem close enough to warm in your hands. By morning, the caravan reads sign and moves again. A boy walks beside the wheel that will one day stand half buried in a museum yard where children climb. A woman ties her hair with a ribbon dyed with walnut hulls and tucks her grandmother's thimble into a pocket. A man rubs the beadwork on a pouch that was a gift from a trader who knew more trails than any printed guide. The sky keeps its endless blue. Thunderheads grow like mountains that move. In such space, a nation learns that design and destiny are words that do not lie down together easily, that plans laid on desks in distant rooms meet rain and rock and hunger and luck, and something new rises from their meeting. You leave this stretch of road with dust on your cuffs and river smell in your sleeves. Flags have moved west, treaties have been penned beside candles far from the lands they measured, and yet every creek crossing and graveside kept choices that no chart records. The map looks finished only at a distance. Up close, it breathes like an animal that turns in sleep and will not settle on one side. You walk on, hearing the whistle of a boat around the bend and the thin bell of a mule train somewhere ahead, and you feel how the balance between design and destiny remains a question asked by wind across grass and by footsteps that refuse to stop at the edge of a page. A low wind crosses fields where corn stubble rasps, and you feel a nation hold its breath along a line that begins as ink on a map and turns into fences and faces and clenched hands. Words in capitals grow sharp. Words in kitchens grow sharper. Wagons creak toward new territories where ballots and rifles arrive on the same road. A prairie town wakes to hoofbeats and the thud of boots on a boarding house step. The morning smells of lamp oil and damp earth. By noon, the street keeps two versions of the future, and neither will give way. A courthouse bench in the late 1850s carries a decision that folds the rights of one man into a sentence that chills more than the room. You turn the page, and the ink seems colder than iron. The river towns whisper the news down the levees. North of those levees, a tall lawyer with careful eyes takes trains through rain and cinderlight, speaking in halls that sweat with crowded breath. His words are plain. The idea underneath them is not new. It wears a coat of older promises and walks with a steady step. Election night arrives with kerosene lamps glowing like small moons in newspaper offices. Telegraph keys chatter in rooms that smell of dust and hot metal. Names arrive in strips and are pasted to boards with flour paste. A final column fills. In some houses, a cheer rises. In others, shutters close against a future that feels like a storm already rattling the roof. Winter turns to spring, and a harbor fortress watches a dawn that will not be quiet. Smoke lifts. The echo carries along tidal flats and over churchyards and up the stair of every capital. The war begins. You move through camps where coffee blackens in tin cups and hardtack clicks against teeth. A wet wool smell hangs in company streets. Letters fold around pressed violets and a lock of hair and travel in saddlebags streaked with mud. The first shock of battle teaches both sides how a field swallows order and returns only noise and smoke and cries that do not sound like any song. A drumbeat tries to gather everything back into a line. The sun leans west and fails to bring comfort. Trains haul whole brigades through night. River iron tugs against current. The soil at a cornfield in Maryland turns slick under boots and stays slick long after the last volley. You stand by a fence of rails that lean and splinter. The air tastes of iron filings and fog. A paper on a distant desk receives this day as ink and date and tally. The day itself will not fit into a number. On a winter morning that follows, a proclamation rides out under a frosted sun, and as its words are read in camps and cabins, the air feels new in the chest, as if lungs open wider than before. Freedom becomes both a promise and a path that cuts through thickets and swamps, and free towns that glow like lanterns across the night. Hymns rise, low and mighty, from tents beside the river. A chaplain smooths a Bible that has crossed many miles, tucked in a haversack. A young man who carried chains last season ties a blue jacket and lifts a musket that bears another man's initials. The flag above him shows a field of stars that grows brighter in the mind than any blue dye can hold. The ground shakes under batteries that trade thunder for hours that feel like years. A ridge in Pennsylvania gathers smoke like a shawl. The air there fills with torn leaves and prayers and the smell of spent powder and trampled wheat. When the guns fall silent, a new stillness arrives that feels more durable than stone. Farther south, a river bends below bluffs where the sound of digging never stops. Earthworks knit themselves by lamplight. Civilians boil leather to soften hunger. The river carries barges under night curtains. A summer morning opens and a garrison yields its keys. That evening, a soldier writes that the water looks different now, broad and unbroken. You follow a column that leaves black footprints in red clay as fires consume rails and storehouses. Barn cats slip through fence slats ahead of the glow. A garden gate stands open and creaks as if the wind itself mourns. At last, a farmhouse parlor receives an hour that ends more than a battle. Two officers sit with manners that feel almost out of place against the memory of fields still smoking. Words pass quietly. A pen scratches. Hats rise. A silence follows that is not empty. Men on both sides breathe in a way that feels like waking from a fever. Flags fold. Hooves drum away down a lane lined with April buds. In another city, a theater glitters and a pistol cracks like the breaking of a plate. Black crepe shadows doorways by morning. Bells toll and graze the edge of grief until the metal itself seems to tire. The war closes and an opening begins. A bureau sets up in rented rooms with ledgers that record rations and contracts and the names of people who choose new names for themselves. Classrooms spring from brush arbors and church basements. Slates scratch. Chalk dust floats in sunbeams that slope through plain windows. A girl traces letters she once heard in whispers. A boy sounds out his first sentence and grins at a world that just grew wider by the space of a line. Families stitch quilts with colors bright as fruit and line them with scraps of uniform that carry their own history without words. Laws arrive one after another, short and heavy. The first unfastens old manacles with a date that becomes a watchword. In coastal towns and far plantations, soldiers read an order in June light, and cheers break into laughter and tears until the day itself feels like a song that will return each year with smoke and sweet cakes and the rustle of bright paper fans. The next law declares citizens where courts once saw only property. The next guards the vote with a promise that shines like a new coin. You hold these coins in your palm and feel warmth gather from your skin. Pressure gathers in other hands. Codes printed in small type try to rebuild old rooms inside new houses. Riders in hoods knock at midnight. A crossroads gallows stains the ground. Sheriffs learn which knocks to ignore and which to hear. Reconstruction governments sketch schools and roads and hospitals and ask the treasury for mortar and boards. Newspapers praise a sunrise one week and predict a storm the next. A compromise in a capital trades an end to troops for a season of calm that proves uneven and brief. The flags on public buildings keep their colors. The flags carried in secret carry a different script. In churches, new choirs lift harmonies that come from fields and forests and rivers. In courthouses, new testimonies speak as boldly as sermons. A craftsman opens a shop that sells harness and plowshares and slates his young apprentice to learn the measure of a horse and a beam in the same day. A widow runs a boarding house where the parlor holds a portrait of a soldier who never returned. The world remakes itself in these rooms with bread and letters and the steady habit of keeping faith with neighbors. You walk lanes where cotton warms in the sun and where small farms trade eggs for soap and news for seed. You pass near hills that hold iron and coal and hear the ring of sledge on spike as rails creep forward with sparks at twilight. The sound belongs to tomorrow. The soil under your feet belongs to yesterday and today in the same breath. A teacher writes equal on a chalkboard and leaves the word there while students file out. The letters hang in the air even after the room grows dark. A thought trails you as you leave this chapter. The war has ended. The nation breathes. The law has spoken in bright, exact phrases, and still the future feels open at the edges. You find yourself turning the key of one question without forcing it to lock. If the night in April had been gentler, if land had been granted with the same firmness as freedom, if federal protection had lingered longer at the courthouse door, the road beyond might have taken another bend. The road that was taken holds both classrooms full of light and fields where promises thin in dry wind. You walk on with both truths in your hands like river stones that warm slowly in the sun. You step from dirt roads into stations where iron rails braid the land and steam sighs against rafters blackened by soot. A whistle draws a long line through morning haze. Conductors lift gloved hands. Porters swing trunks with an easy rhythm learned from hard years. You stand beside a bench that smells of oil and cinder and feel the country tie its distant rooms together one car at a time. A desert wind dries your lips at Promontory in 1869. Spikes gleam on polished ties while two engines face each other like patient animals that have finally met at a waterhole. Cameras blink with their slow magic. Hands reach to steady the last blows. When hammer and iron kiss the rail, a cheer lifts and runs along the telegraph to cities far away. East and west now share a single breath. Chilly smoke curls from campfires beside the new line. In the next valley, a herd startles at the clang and then returns to the grass that keeps its own rhythm. You ride a coach through sage and then wheat and then coal hills that smolder even when snow covers the slag. Coal dust powders your cuffs. A breaker boy's fingers turn black each hour he sorts stone from fuel. Steel mills make a night that never grows dark. Furnaces roaring like caged storms while cranes roll and sparks fall in glowing rain. You swallow the taste of metal and push open a door where a timekeeper's clock waits with a blank face and a hunger for minutes. The day answers with a siren, and the street outside turns to a river of lunch pails. Across the ocean, a harbor bell rings, and you watch a statue lift a torch into air washed with salt. The year is 1886. Copper shines beneath a pale new patina. You hear a phrase in French and another in a dozen other tongues, each with its own melody, each trying the word liberty on the tongue like a prayer and a promise at once. Small boats spread in a fan around the pedestal, their wakes braiding like ribbons on green water. You enter a vaulted hall where suitcases thump and children cling. White chalk marks paws on wool shoulders. Names arrive in thick books that smell of paste and ink. Eyes meet the inspection line with hope sharpened by hunger. A clerk mishears a syllable and a family learns a new sound for the same love. A woman presses a photograph to her chest where it warms and softens. A boy holds a bundle that rattles faintly with the tools of a father's trade. You catch the scent of oranges and wet rope and soap from a shared basin and step back into daylight that seems larger than the sky on the old road. City streets take the weight of new feet. Tenements breathe garlic and steam and coal and song. Laundry lines flutter like bright flags strung from brick to brick. Pushcarts offer pickles and pretzels and hot chestnuts when frost scratches windows. Tailors bend low under gaslight. Peddlers call in cadences that turn alleys into music. A synagogue fills with voices that rise and fall with the week's portion. A church around the corner answers with bells that know the calendar by heart. A storefront prints newspapers in 2 languages and stitches a new neighborhood into the city's larger coat. Not all welcomes stay warm. A carpenter in the West points to a sign that keeps a door closed to his family. A law from 1882 cuts a gate in the air and keeps it shut. A cook folds his apron and stares at a train platform where work waits but permission does not. He holds the characters of a poem in his mouth until they taste like strong tea. Paper screens crackle in a boarding house while a distant gong and a fiddle practice the difficult art of living under a roof that does not always listen. In a square that smells of wet stone and beer, workers gather after a march for shorter hours. Evening pools in the corners. A voice rises on a platform. Then a burst of light and a hard sound tear the night and leave a scar that spreads through print and rumor and courtroom heat. The city stands in a hush that lasts longer than the echo. Police files grow thick. Meeting halls grow cautious. A widow folds a handbill and keeps it between pages of a family Bible. The next morning, the factory whistles blow on time. The rhythm does not forget what it learned, even when the street pretends to. Chicago burns one year, and you feel heat paint the sky with orange strokes that leave a dark outline long after the last ember dies. The city answers with a forest of tall frames, and then with steel that climbs into clouds. Riveters walk narrow beams with lunch pails swinging from hooks like small bells. A girl rides an elevator for the first time and gasps when the floor moves under her with a grace that feels like a trick. A new word, skyline, finds its use. Lake wind rushes between canyons of glass, while newspapers sell dreams of offices above the gulls. Baseball fields open in empty lots and breathe cut grass and roasted peanuts. A leather glove softens under linseed and sun. A pitcher hides the ball against his hip, then sends it spinning with a seam that hums. Children learn the names of distant cities because a scoreboard demands it. Ragtime dances from a piano behind swinging doors, and feet keep time on plank floors rubbed smooth by Saturday nights. The music knows sadness, but carries it lightly. You cross a bridge that trembles under the weight of morning. Streetcars hiss and clatter. A woman threads past a stack of shirtwaists and feeds cloth under a needle that sings faster than her breath. Doors on the upper floors stay locked to keep breaks short. In 1911, a spark flashes where lint gathers, and the room turns thick before anyone can stand. Smoke pushes against windows. A crowd in the street opens its mouth to shout and cannot find any sound that does not taste of ashes. The city that rises from that day writes rules that place ladders and alarms where pocket ledgers once placed only price. You read those rules on a wall and think of hands that never made it home. Farther west, orchards bloom in rows neat as verse. Irrigation cuts glittering angles under a noon sun that smells of alfalfa. Laborers bend with practiced grace. A camp cook ladles beans and hands out coffee, dark enough to stand a spoon. Songs pass from mouth to mouth until they sound like water over stone. A strike begins with a few quiet refusals, then grows to a line of bodies that move as one long note down a fence. A sheriff watches with a thumb under his belt and a radio that carries instructions without sympathy. The harvest waits because choices take longer than apples to ripen. The nation eats and travels and reads at speeds that would have stunned a grandfather who once timed his work by sunrise and shadow. A farmer buys a reaper that hums and shortens the day to time left for talk on the porch. A clerk rides an elevator to a desk at the 10th floor and writes figures that move capital across states in an afternoon. A teacher rides a streetcar to an evening class and stacks books beside a window that finds the last pink of sunset between two stone towers. None of these hours answers the oldest question about cost. Soil loses a layer to wind on a day when trains scream by, but no rain falls. A back gives out at 40 and still needs to lift at dawn. A forest thins, and the stream below it runs warmer than the trout remember. You carry all of this like a bundle tied with twine. Rails run to oceans. Factories glow. The torch at the harbor still shines above fog that tastes of salt and smoke, a promise that feels true and unfinished at the same time. No single ledger tells whether prosperity grows like a generous tree or stands on a scaffold that someone else holds in aching arms. You step from the platform into a street that smells of yeast and coal and brass polish, and letting the crowd carry you, you feel the country learn a new heartbeat that sounds like wheels on steel and footsteps on stone, hopeful and heavy in the same breath. A chill rides the wind through canyons of glass, and you feel streets grow thin at the edges as signs in windows turn from bright to blank. A broker's chalk breaks, a clerk's pen pauses, and a long breath leaves the market without returning. Papers skid along curbs like startled birds. You stand with others beneath ticking clocks that refuse to explain themselves. By night, the city glows with fewer lamps. By morning, a line forms beside a door that smells of coffee and damp wool, and the word relief begins to carry both mercy and shame inside the same small cup. You walk past a shanty town where cardboard softens in drizzle and tin echoes when rain begins. Smoke finds holes in patched roofs and wanders out like tired spirits. A woman stirs a pot that gives up more steam than broth. A man straightens a necktie before stepping into the day as if the knot itself could keep him upright. A child sleeps wrapped in a coat that never fit, one hand still cupped as if it held yesterday's apple. Newspapers serve as blankets. Nails serve as pegs. Hope serves as the thin thread that holds the whole tent against the night. Banks close with shades drawn. A small barber sweeps the same hair twice, waiting for footsteps that do not come. In kitchens, the last jar lifts from the last shelf. The radio tells two kinds of news, numbers that fall and songs that rise to lift shoulders for a minute. A preacher in a storefront reads a psalm while the streetcar rattles past. A shoeshine stand waits with brushes clean and idle. The morning smells of starch and worry. Your breath fogs glass and leaves a brief oval that clears before anyone can trace a message into it. Wind turns mean across the plains. The light grows brown, then copper, then a color that has no name. Chickens crouch in doorways. Cattle face the storm with eyes rimmed in grit. A curtain of earth runs the horizon like a low tide made of sky. You stand in a kitchen where a wet sheet hangs over a crib to sift the air. Spoons clink in glasses set to catch whatever dust falls first. A Sunday turns black at noon, and the yard disappears as if the world has folded itself inward. Soil that once smelled of wheat lifts, flies, and does not remember the way back. Plow, drought, grass pulled away from its old work. Heat that lingers longer than elders recall. Each piece asks to be the main cause, and the answer never quite settles in one chair. Roads to the west fill with trucks that carry chairs tied sideways and bedsteads upright like gates for a day that never opens. A fruit crate becomes a pantry. A quilt becomes a wall. The highway hums with families who slip between orchards and fences, chasing a rumor of wages that moves faster than any of them can walk. A camp forms along a slough where willows lean into muddy water. Coffee boils black and strong. Children wash faces in a metal basin and blink when the sun climbs the first line of cottonwood branches. A quiet visitor with a heavy camera asks no questions and leaves with the shape of a mother's worry held forever in silver salts. Spring returns to the capital with flags lifting under a new oath. You stand by a loudspeaker in a park while words cross the air with a cadence that steadies hands on lunch pails. A bank holiday declares a pause and grants a rest to nerves frayed to threads. Chain doors close without panic and open with faces at counters again. A new insurance for deposits teaches ordinary savings to breathe easy. A voice on the radio sits near every stove in the land and calls you friend, explains a plan, and asks for patience in sentences that sound like someone leaning on a porch rail at dusk. Crews in green shirts rise with the sun in pine pitch and bird call. Young men set camps in clearings that smell of rain and sap and cut bread. They carry shovels and mattocks and plant rows of small lives that will one day throw shade on cool creeks. Trails appear where only deer once passed. Gullies learn new habits of staying put. Pay envelopes cross kitchen tables many counties away, and a mother tucks 3 bills under the sugar tin with a sigh that sounds like a hymn's last note. Brick yards and bridge sites wake to the beat of hammers that had rusted too long. A shovel takes a first bite from a riverbank that will soon hold a concrete wall with the date set deep into its face. Men hang on cables above water that flows green and relentless. Dams rise on a valley that once knew only rain and heat and now learns the slow hum of turbines. Nightfall brings light to porches where kerosene once stood alone, and cicadas sing against bulbs that burn with a clean white glow. A radio joins the shelf beside the flour and tells weather and cattle prices and ball scores on waves that open the world. Post offices bloom with color as murals carry plows and rivers and quilts onto plaster. A library opens where a shoe factory failed. A road that was mud in March turns to a black ribbon that holds a steady line from town to town. A school band plays under a grandstand roof that this year does not leak. The blue eagle appears in windows, a small bird of hope pasted near the bell pull. Its wings stretched above a promise to do a part that no one can quite measure until bread returns to every table. A new promise to the old grower opens in a language of parity and price, and fields find rest where they had been asked to run beyond reason. A new promise to the old worker arrives in the shape of a wage that will not fall through the floor, and hours that leave evenings for home. A new promise to elders and widows and children prints into law with a date and a seal. Not a charity, but a covenant that warms in the palm like a coin earned across many years. A new promise to nations first here turns the wheel toward councils and schools that listen to their own voices, and the sound of that turn carries farther than the paper looks. The dance with capital shifts to a new tune. Markets learn boundaries that keep fever from becoming fire. A curtain lifts between the teller's counter and the betting room, and the old mingling of savings and gamble grows shy. In the distance, mills still cough smoke and mines still breathe dust, yet inspectors learn to count more than output, and a hard hat begins to mean more than brass and sweat. The ledger moves toward order without learning how to love the poor, and still the poor find small victories on kitchen calendars, where bills sometimes line up with pay in a kinder way. You sit again by a radio when a storm lashes a coast and a city cries into the dark. A parade of trucks grinds through night toward levees that need shoulders more than speeches. A violin plays on the air to hold grief steady while the waters fall back. In a different week, a dust sky returns to the plains with less fury than before, as if the land itself remembers the lesson of grass and the patience of fallow. In every month, the argument rises about what lifts a people from hunger. Some point to checks signed in careful script. Some point to dams and roads that will outlast the names that approved them. Some point to factories that hum only when new orders of war begin. The truth wears many coats and never chooses one for every season. You rise to leave this decade, and the road feels firmer underfoot. Soup lines shorten, storefronts brighten. A father buys a hat for Sunday and tips it to his wife as if the brim could carry her a blessing. A mother folds a letter from a son who planted trees and writes back that the yard holds shade now. The dust still lifts at times, thinner, lighter, and drifts away. The blue bird fades on shop glass, but keeps a ghost of color. The recovery's strength draws from many wells, and the exact share that each one carries remains a story that changes when told in a mill town, a wheat county, a river valley lit by new current. You accept the mix as you would accept bread with several grains, good enough to feed the day, not simple enough to name with one word. You wake to a radio that hums like a hive, and a voice breaks the Sunday calm with a bulletin that tilts the room. Harbor water boils beneath black smoke. Sirens rise and fall along a coast you cannot see. By evening, porch lights burn late in every town. Neighbors count suns. Windows gather stars on small blue fields stitched by careful hands. Flags lift even when the wind is tired. The country turns from ordinary time to a new calendar that begins with shock and duty. You stand in a courthouse where men trade farm boots for olive cloth, while a clerk stamps papers that smell of ink and starch. A boy signs his name with a hand that shakes and then steadies. A woman pins her hair, folds her apron, and walks through a factory door that once stayed closed to her. The sound inside is a river, presses thudding, belts hissing, rivet guns snapping like flint. Lunch pails knock against benches. A poster near the clock smiles with a rolled sleeve and a promise that strength can be taught. In a corner by the timekeeper, a lunch tin carries a child's crayon drawing of a plane and a note that says, "Come home." Trains roll with blackout shades drawn. Headlights dim on coastal roads. A sailor leans over a rail and breathes salt mixed with diesel. Convoys gather like migrating whales and slip into night under skies that keep their secrets. In desert basins, coyote song drifts past rows of barracks where cadets dream of wings. In forest camps, recruits run under rain that smells of pine pitch. Steel plants throw dawn into midnight and do not rest. Victory gardens open where lawns once slept. Beans climb twine on back porches. Children feed rabbits to learn patience and thrift. Ration books rustle like small birds in kitchen drawers. The map of war spreads across tables in rooms that keep the blinds low. Atlantic swells lift gray decks. Arctic convoys knock ice from rails with gloved fists. In North Africa, wind fills uniforms with grit and stings the eyes until tears carve clean tracks on dusty cheeks. You ride a landing craft toward a French beach where ropes sway and helmets touch in prayer that uses no words. The ramp drops. Water climbs to the waist. The shore rises as a wall. A stubborn inch becomes a precious yard. By night, the sand holds boot prints and spent casings that shine like dull coins in the moon. On moonlit fields over England, engines thrum with a low patience. Air crews climb aboard and taste warm metal and wool. A gloved hand pats a panel for luck. The runway flares, then falls behind. Navigation lights fade into a black that has no bottom. Searchlights comb the sky like blind fingers. The guns speak below, then stop, then speak again. Morning brings a chalkboard in a ready room and a row of names that came home beside a row that did not. The neat letters cannot show coffee gone cold or the quiet seat where a jacket still hangs. The home front binds itself tighter. A janitor in a school buys a bond and tucks the certificate behind a picture of a lighthouse. A band plays on courthouse steps and coins ring in a milk can that serves as a drum. A newsreel flickers in a theater that smells of popcorn and damp coats, showing welders with sparks bursting like small suns around their boots. A column in a city paper prints a photograph of pilots who trained in the deep south and flew with steady hands across winter skies. Another story tells of radio men who send messages in the quick music of deserts and canyons so enemies cannot understand. Church basements stack canned peaches and wool socks. Service flags glow in front windows at dusk. Blue stars for hope, gold stars for grief that stands with straight shoulders. Not every measure feels noble. In a Western valley, a notice on a window orders families to pack only what they can carry. Tag strings scratch skin. A fern left on a porch begins to wilt. Buses take mountain passes and descend to fairgrounds that smell of dust and hay. Later, the buses lead to barracks behind stubborn fences. A baseball game starts in an open yard because the day keeps asking for ordinary play. The flag rises anyway. The wind tugs its edge. The choice that fear demanded remains heavy long after the gates open. The Pacific speaks in coral and salt and rain that falls straight down like chains of glass. An island ridge smokes and then quiets and then smokes again. A letter home carries sand that will never leave the fold. On a winter river far away, ice locks against its banks while soldiers move through ruins as carefully as a man walking in a room full of sleeping children. Cities breathe through broken windows. A violin plays in a cellar where candles gutter and the bow still finds a clean note. Deep in the desert, a town without a name switches off its lights each night, while figures in white coats fill blackboards with symbols that look like spells. A tower rises on sand that remembers ancient seas. Before dawn, a new sun appears and writes a brief day into stone. Weeks later, a bomber lifts under a blue sky and flies toward two cities that live ordinary lives under tiled roofs and paper screens. Heat and light flower where streets had held morning errands. The choice to end a war with fire keeps its own silence, as if other doors might have opened in the same corridor, and no one can say which one would have held. On a ship in a wide bay, sailors throw caps into air that smells of diesel and apple peels. Horns answer from every pier. Streets fill with paper and music. A kiss on a corner becomes a photograph that lives in a million kitchens. You feel the world lean toward calm. Then you notice how the calm carries burdens. Europe lies in rubble that grinds underfoot like coarse sand. Asia counts wounds with a patience learned from centuries. Refugees walk roads in every direction like threads searching for a loom. In the ruins, a school chalkboard leans against a wall and still holds the day's last word. Peace writes laws that turn uniforms into college seats and mortgages. A returning sergeant studies by a lamp while a baby sleeps on his chest, and a streetcar rattles past small houses that smell of paint and lilac. A welder who mastered wings at a bomber plant opens a shop that fixes radios and toasters, and later televisions that glow blue in living rooms. A family plants a maple in a front yard and measures a child against its trunk each spring. Ball fields fill with boys in caps and with women who learned fast hands in factories and now carry a league of their own into summer light. Factories keep humming. The line that once made tanks now turns steel into tractors and stoves and bright cars with grills that smile. The hum stretches across oceans as contracts and crates cross borders with new ease. On a river, a hall opens with flags from many nations hanging like a sewn rainbow, a hope that careful speech will tame storms that once required cannon. In a mountain hotel, bankers and ministers sign pages that set new rules for money that moves between ports, and clerks file the papers in cabinets that click like metronomes. Power at home grows brighter. Wages rise. Subdivisions spread along old farm lanes and glow at night like constellations brought down to earth. Refrigerators purr and freezers keep summer sweet through winter. Yet the new abundance does not reach every address. A veteran who wore a ribbon for courage is told that the deed office has no houses for his kind. A worker who built ships must pass a test at a courthouse desk before a ballot can be earned. The promise of a bill that opens schools and loans does its best work in some neighborhoods and barely whispers in others. A proof that victories abroad still wait to be finished on familiar streets. At the edge of this chapter, you pause. Power has moved from a few rivers to every socket. Power has moved from a small capital to foundries and farms and campuses that shine at dusk. Power has also gathered in rooms that do not admit visitors, where files are stamped and choices turn on secrets. You stand in the hum of this new season and feel pride and worry share the same breath. A nation that learned how to build in weeks what once took years now must learn how to keep its strength from hardening into habit, and how to let the light of new lamps reach every window without leaving any corner in shadow. You stand on a schoolhouse step while morning light gathers on brick and flag, and a door opens to let a small current of cold air and new courage pass into a hallway that smells of chalk and floor wax. A child tightens the strap of a book satchel. Another child grips a lunch pail and inhales. Soldiers watch from a quiet distance. The year is a middle year of the century, and a court has spoken with words that carry into every classroom. Desks scrape the floor. A bell rings. The sound travels farther than anyone expects. Night brings a different bell that rides a radio signal up to the roof of the world. A small sphere speaks in beeps that pass over farm fields and tenement roofs and ship decks, a heartbeat that sets pencils tapping on kitchen tables. You feel the sky turn into a new kind of frontier. In the desert, a white suit receives a helmet that smells of plastic and fear and resolve. In a hangar, a capsule waits like a bell without a clapper. On a coast, a tower grows beside dunes and palmetto. The countdown is a prayer that uses numbers instead of names. You move along a city street where a bus sighs at the curb, and a seamstress who has worked a long day chooses her seat with care and refuses to rise. The driver's hand lifts, the air thickens, a quiet spreads, then a long season of walking follows. Shoes wear smooth at the heels. Church basements fill with coffee and plans. A pulpit teaches patience that does not mean surrender. A city rethinks the map inside its own head, and the wheels of the bus turn under a new promise. Counters shine under bright lights where servers set plates with measured grace. You sit on a stool that is not meant for you and keep your back straight while insults spatter like grease that snaps from the grill. A hand pours coffee that you do not drink. Another hand writes your name on a list that will become a lesson. Cameras blink, and newspapers lift the image into 1,000 kitchens. The stool remains. The doors swing open at the usual hour. The country learns how steady a person can breathe when an entire room leans against that breath. A bridge over a quiet river becomes a threshold. You walk it while hymns carry the pace, and the sky watches with an expression no one can read. Deputies crowd the far side. A cloud of gas blossoms and stings, and people fall and rise and fall again, while cameras catch every step and send it into living rooms. Days later, the road from a small town to a larger one fills with feet and song, and the march comes to a statehouse that has never heard choruses like these. A pen soon moves across vellum in a distant capital, and hands that were turned away from ballots find a welcome they had always been promised. You stand on a mall where the air smells of warm stone and sun lotion, and paper signs held in patient hands. A preacher speaks with a rhythm that carries up the reflecting pool and into trees that hold cicadas like choir lofts. Children sit on shoulders. A veteran folds his cap and presses it under his arm. The words feel as light as breath and as heavy as a cornerstone. A year passes, and the same man rides in an open car along a southern road, and later the same nation gathers by a church door and holds candles that drip in the dark. Bells toll in many towns, their sound thinner for the loss and richer for the memory they pledged to guard. You watch a pen sign a law that forbids old cruelties at lunch counters and hotel desks, where the smile once carried a gate inside it. You watch another pen sign a law that gives a clear road to the ballot and sets exam tables and sheriff's oaths aside when they stand in the way. You feel a country put on a better coat, still mended in many places, still too tight in others, yet warmer than the one it wore yesterday. The sky keeps calling. The beep of arrival grows into a parade of launches that paint the morning with a sound like torn silk. A pilot rides a tower of fire and returns with a look that mixes astonishment and relief. Another circles the planet while schoolchildren build small rockets from cardboard tubes and glue. Crews float and practice and learn how to dock in the dark. In a December, a capsule orbits a cold moon and looks homeward to find a blue marble floating in a black bowl. Clouds whirled like cream in coffee. In a July, a ladder meets dust that has waited since seas were steam. A boot presses a print that looks soft and will outlast mountains. You stand in a living room where the television glows like a small altar and hear the room inhale as if the earth itself needs a second to believe what its child has done. Along other streets, the air smells of incense and rain on asphalt. Guitars find new chords. Young faces turn toward campuses and parks with flowers and slogans, and a wish to stop a war that gathers sons and sends them to jungles where rain falls like ropes. A draft card burns in a coffee can. A mother tapes a photograph in a window and touches it each night before sleep. News film climbs stairs and drops into cans that rattle toward editing rooms while anchors straighten stacks of paper that feel heavier than paper should. In another living room, a book with a plain cover rests beside a lamp and gives a quiet name to pressures felt by millions. A meeting fills with women who have carried offices and kitchens on their backs, and now set both on the table to count the weight. A phone rings at a small law office, where a new group arranges itself under a name that promises action that does not ask permission. A help wanted page that once split ads by gender learns a new habit. A workplace that once dictated marriage and makeup learns to measure worth by something cleaner. You pause at a shoreline tarred by a spill that turns gulls into statues. You lift a newspaper that prints a river on fire and read lines that speak of poisons in water and silence in orchards when spring should sing. A scientist's voice travels in sentences clear as glass and fills libraries and kitchen shelves with a warning that sounds like love for the world. The warning becomes a law that asks smoke to clear a little before leaving a stack and asks streams to remember how trout feel on a cold morning. At a dock, a ship yawns and swallows crates while a crane dips and lifts like a heron. A new law reshapes the line at the port and opens doors that once measured worth by origin rather than by promise. Streets answer with new music and recipes and newspapers that teach two alphabets to share a column. A language of many tongues finds a steady rhythm in markets and schools. Children interpret for elders with the grace of water finding a lower path. Television light continues to wash walls at dinner. A fist lifts at a metal stand and speaks without sound. A house band on a nightly show gives a nation a backbeat, while a host smiles through a thin cloud of cigarette smoke. A swing set in a new suburb squeaks as the moonrise clears the roof of a ranch house, and a boy in pajamas tilts a cardboard helmet just so. He believes the sky will give him room. The decade closes, and you hold its weight carefully. Rockets write fire on blue air. Rights claim space on paper, and then on pavement, and then in hearts. The dream grows wider and also more restless. Whether progress means a clean leap forward or a braid of gains that still leaves strands loose remains an open line that does not need to resolve tonight. You breathe and feel the rhythm of engines and hymns and marches settle into a single tide that pulls the country towards shores it has named but not yet reached. Evening hum fills living rooms where wood cabinets hold televisions like small hearths, and you sit close enough to see the glow soften on your hands. The screen shows hearings where microphones bloom like black flowers, and a nation leans toward truth that arrives in careful sentences and tape hiss. Paper flashes under camera lights. A pen taps. Summer carries the sound of resignation, spoken in a voice that once traveled with certainty and now folds itself away. The night air through open windows smells of cut grass and city dust, and you feel how trust can empty and then begin to refill by drops. At curbside before dawn, cars snake around corners to stations where pumps click and stop. A clerk flips a sign that reads "Odd Today" and shakes his head when a plate does not match. Windows roll down. Radios whisper prices and rumors. Coffee steams from a thermos. The nozzle smells of gasoline and metal, and the heat rising from hoods smells like pennies in a pocket. Lines shorten by noon and then lengthen again on a new day. The world beyond the windshield presses its weight through a small chrome handle, and patience turns into a skill muscles learn without pride. A summer of red, white, and blue arrives with tinny parade music and cheap paper hats and fireworks that scatter sparks into humid air. The bicentennial unfurls bunting along porches and lampposts. Tall ships ride into harbors with canvas trimmed tight and hulls that creak like old instruments tuned again. You stand on a pier and hear a drum echo between warehouses as if the past has borrowed today's streets for an hour. The flag looks both older and younger, a familiar face in a different light. Morning returns with a different kind of brightness. A storefront television shows a campaign film that speaks of morning in America, lawns damp with sprinklers, couples holding hands on new sidewalks, a ribbon cut with oversized scissors that gleam. You taste optimism as if it were citrus. A voice on the radio repeats that the long shadow has lifted. Factories repaint signs, bank lobbies shine their brass. A man hangs an open placard on a small shop that nearly closed and smiles at the bell above the door. A woman climbs into a suit that fits the new office she earned. A child learns the name of a shuttle and draws it on loose-leaf paper with stars that take their places again. The songs in this decade mix neon and ache. A guitar riff turns malls into cathedrals, while food courts smell of cinnamon and fry oil. A boy clips a cassette into a plastic player and walks down a sidewalk that keeps time under his shoes. A girl learns a dance from a screen that moves faster than radio ever could. A stage glows in a farmhouse basement where a teenager rehearses lines for a play that explains the news to her grandparents. In another room, a black granite wall receives touches that leave prints of heat and grief, each fingertip recognizing names that returned in letters and did not return at all. The wall's quiet becomes a language that many learn without being taught. Office lights burn later. A banker speaks the word deregulation and smiles at a chart that points up. Traders cheer at a bell that has always rung but now carries a brighter echo. A family in a wheat county watches interest rates slide down from a height that once felt like a cliff, then feels a different pressure in prices that refuse to rise for their crops. On a prairie road, one mailbox leans and then another. A seed salesman shifts in his seat and folds a brochure that makes no difference this season. At the same time, a coder teaches a beige box how to answer in green letters to the word hello and laughs when the machine obeys. And the glow on her glasses looks like a sunrise no one else has seen yet. On a winter morning, teachers and children step outside and tilt their faces to a clear sky that holds a bright arc and then a Y of white that drifts into silence. Breath fogs. Voices lower and then stop. Televisions roll carts into classrooms and the air smells faintly of warm dust and sorrow. The country learns how exploration can bless and wound on the same day. Yet the sky keeps calling. Rockets rise again with quieter crowds and careful hands. And nights by coasts smell of salt and kerosene, as if resolve itself had a scent. Downtown streets rumble under rallies, where a quilt spreads across a mall like a meadow of color stitched by grief and love. Panels lift names and open entire lives in simple fabric. You kneel to read a square and feel the weight of a decade pour itself into cotton and thread. A candlelight vigil moves along a sidewalk, each flame cupped in a palm that trembles but does not spill. The city learns a slower kindness than applause. It learns the discipline of staying. Telephones shrink to plastic bricks. Screens glow with music videos that edit the world into fast cuts and glitter. A sitcom laughs from a couch where a bowl of popcorn goes cold. A campaign ad promises smaller and larger things at once. An airplane ticket becomes easier for a clerk to print. A suitcase becomes easier to wheel through linoleum light. Food on a plate tastes of far coasts now that borders and menus soften and markets on paper grow taller than any building downtown. The taste of change lives in simple items in hand and on tongue. Then a wall that once cut a city opens like a curtain, and you push through a crowd that sounds like prayers spoken without words. Stone chips fly from a scarred line that loses its sharpness under hammers in bare hands. People pass bottles through an opening, and then pass instruments, and then pass children who will not remember that the block ever held soldiers. The air smells of snow and exhaust and new paint. For a moment, you believe the century has learned a song with only major chords. Even then, you feel other rooms beyond this plaza where budgets turn to arguments and factories measure days by a different clock now that borders drift. The exact mix of courage and accident and fear and fatigue that toppled the old system refuses to pour neatly into one cup. A computer chirps on a desk, a phone rings and teaches a voice how to travel through fiber like light. A photo prints in minutes and then in seconds. A clerk at a copy center feeds a page that becomes a stack that will fill a mailbox across town by afternoon. A truck idles under a loading dock. A satellite tucks into a new orbit and passes over a farm where a boy aims a dish at the sky and learns that his favorite team plays on a channel his father never knew existed. Connection begins to taste as common as wheat bread. The flag keeps its particular crack in midday wind. It snaps above stadiums and schoolyards and post offices and new cul-de-sacs that spread across former fields like constellations laid upon Earth. The line between renewal and nostalgia stays soft. An ad for a truck shows a barn and a sunset, then sells a feature that belongs to a city street. A song on the radio borrows a melody older than its singer and makes it feel new. People argue about whether strength lives in looking forward or in restoring what felt right before, and the answer changes by town and trade and memory. You leave this era with lights bright behind you and the scent of toner and popcorn and cold air in your scarf. Markets feel open, flags feel vivid, screens feel near. Yet under the shine, you hear questions that do not quiet, about who pays when the factory gate slides shut, about who is invited when new money learns a new address, about whose story the morning is meant to welcome. The day has begun again, and the sun on the horizon carries both the warmth of promise and the steady reminder that every dawn asks work in return. A clear morning opens with the sound of traffic and coffee cups, and you feel the city breathe in before the day begins. A plane crosses the blue and vanishes behind a tower. Sirens rise where gulls usually cry. People look up. Fire turns windows into mouths. Paper drifts like slow snow. Dust moves like weather through streets that smell of hot metal and plaster and smoke that will cling to jackets for months. You join a long walk across bridges where shoes scuff and a silence heavier than shouting holds thousands in the same step. In the evening, candles bloom along stoops and railings. A line forms at blood banks that cannot take every gift. The next day, a wall fills with photographs that carry smiles and birthdays and the names of schools and favorite songs. A few nights later, two white beams climb into the dark and make a cathedral without walls. The light hums a kind of prayer. You breathe with it and feel how loss can become a beacon that does not fade. Airports learn a new grammar. Shoes come off and trays slide. Announcements tread carefully through the alphabet of codes. Bottles shrink into clear bags. Lines learn patience because there is nothing else to learn. A new department gathers many offices under one roof and teaches words like watch list and alert level to people who once listened only for gate numbers. The radio at breakfast speaks of safety and liberty and does not offer a final measure that fits every ear. Mountains rise in a country far away, and the cold on their ridges bites even through wool. The year has not yet closed when the first missions move through sky and sand. You ride in a convoy that smells of dust and diesel and watch villages return to ordinary life as schools open and markets lay out fruit and tea. A letter home carries a pressed flower that turns brittle under the heat of a day when nothing happens except the quiet luck of finding shade. Night vision paints the world in green. Names for valleys become the names of weeks. The war begins to feel like weather that never quite leaves the horizon. Another desert waits across a border drawn by old hands. A statue tilts and falls in a square while cameras watch. A city that once shook under bombardment glows under lamps and satellite dishes. Markets reopen with oranges stacked like bright planets. The same streets later fill with sirens and smoke. A soldier takes off a helmet and runs a hand through hair that has collected dust from many roofs. The reasons that carried the country into this war do not gather into one simple paragraph in any house, and the end keeps moving like heat on a road. At home, the news prints ribbons on page corners and pins them to lapels. Country songs and rock ballads carry the same chorus for a while. Windows hold flags, some folded and framed, some sun-bleached and still. A stadium sings an anthem with voices that do not rush. In barbershops and on porches, people speak in tones kept low by decency and fear and love for the young. Water rises along another coast. Wind pushes tides past their lines. Levees break, and the city hears a sound like a door splintering in a storm that does not end when the rain ends. You climb a stair in a shelter that smells of bleach and wet clothes and the breath of many people who did not plan to sleep under this roof. Brass instruments later lift their bells on a corner where beaded fences and paint that remembers joy insist on returning. The city will dance again. The time between the song and the silence remains part of the dance. A street far from any harbor notices small signs go up on lawns and then on whole blocks. For sale sits beside foreclosure, and then repossession appears on a taped sheet that flaps in wind that smells of cut grass and glue. A banker folds a tie into a box that will leave a building with a name in bronze above the door. In September of 2008, an old firm files papers that sound like the shutting of a heavy lid. Screens on desks wash green and then red again. Traders stare at numbers that seem to misbehave. A cabinet in Washington fills with plans that change by the hour. A program with many billions in its name finds votes after long nights and teaches a new phrase to kitchens that count change by hand. You walk through a mall where music feels too bright for the hour. A clerk adjusts an empty display and pretends not to see the closed store across the hall. At a job center, a woman smooths a resume with a thumb that smells of toner and hope. A man who laid block for 20 years shakes the hand of a younger man who now holds the clipboard. The handshake feels like a lesson no one asked to learn. On another street, a soup kitchen adds one more table and keeps the line moving. Neighbors share rides to stretch the last quarter tank. Gardens spread behind churches where pumpkins never grew before. A teacher shows students how compound interest hurt as easily as it helped. The term Main Street lives in a new voice, tender and angry at once. You read a headline that promises recovery and another that warns of deeper trouble. You watch a small store reopen with a sign that looks hand-painted and brave. You watch another store stack boxes of files and lock the door for good. The market breathes, then coughs, then breathes again. Retirement plans shrink and slowly regain shape like a blanket drying after rain. The memory of what the numbers can do remains in the room long after the charts turn pleasant. Between these shocks, a phone in your pocket learns to be more than a phone. Fingers flick and a map unfolds without paper. News jumps a gate and lands in a palm. A mother sees a face at a far base and smiles into a small glass. A friend lifts a camera into a march and sends the sound of feet into rooms where no one expected to hear it. The future arrives with the soft click of a touchscreen. You feel the current quicken as if a river has found a new channel through its own sand. You return at dusk to a plaza where names are read in a cadence that never grows old. A bell answers each one. The smoke smell from that morning long ago has faded from coats, yet it lingers in memory the way salt stays on air near a harbor. At the airport, a child drops a stuffed animal into a bin, and a guard returns it with a smile that does not reach the eyes. In a living room, a candle still burns on the anniversary, and a photograph keeps watching from a mantel. You end this span of years with the taste of ash and rain, and the faint sweetness of oranges in a reopened market. Towers fall and are remembered in stone and light. Wars begin and lengthen into parts of life that no one can store in one drawer. Markets tremble and settle and tremble again. The line between protection and freedom keeps shifting in the gray before dawn, and no single lantern holds it still. You carry forward a steady note that people found among sirens and shouting, a note of hands that lifted one another up from stairs and floodwater and unemployment lines. That note becomes part of the country's breath as the next decade gathers voices and screens and storms that test every room of the house. You settle among glowing rooms where blue light washes ceiling paint, and a kettle saws on the stove the way summer trees murmur after dusk. Screens bloom with family faces in tidy squares, voices braided across counties and coasts when a sickness moves through towns like weather that forgets to stop. Grocery aisles smell of citrus and bleach. Sidewalks learn the distance of two shopping carts end to end. Masks rise like new etiquette. Plain cloth and floral print and stars and stripes sewn at kitchen tables. Windows collect paper hearts and crayon rainbows. At 7 on some blocks, a clatter of spoons and pans thanks the hands that keep wards lit through the night. Stadiums glow without crowds and play the sound of hope through speakers to empty seats. Classrooms shrink into little windows as children read to microphones that pick up dogs snoring and a lawnmower 3 houses away. A nurse writes her name large on her gown to replace the smile that cloth now hides. Vials thaw in winter light and the first sleeves roll, a small sting and a long exhale. You feel how a nation relearns patience in the slow line of a clinic and in porch conversations that last until the tea grows cold. You keep a list on the fridge to remember who needs checking before you turn in. In a summer of marching feet, the street becomes a ledger, each step a line. Signs rise in careful hands, some on cardboard, some on cloth tied to broom handles. Names are spoken in a cadence that asks them to stay. Knees touch pavement. The wind lifts a corner of a banner and sets it down again. Camera phones see what people have said for years and carry it beyond a single block. Murals bloom on plywood like night gardens. A law changes in a chamber where the carpet mutes footsteps, and the door opens to a new kind of training written in simple words. A date in June takes its place on the federal calendar, and a long wait finds a bell. The land speaks in another tongue. Smoke drifts over a river, and noon looks like late evening. Pines crackle on a slope where the ground has not been allowed to clean itself with small fires for too many seasons. A Gulf Coast city boards windows and ties boats, then unties them and sweeps porches as cicadas return to their song. Sirens rise when twisters pull fences up by the posts. A reservoir sinks to a pale ring that reads like a yardstick against stone. You press your palm to a sun-warmed rock and feel how the earth holds yesterday and today at once. The mystery of where this balance will settle lives in the uneasy quiet after wind falls and before anyone speaks. New tools hum in the background like small generators. A program learns to finish sentences and then learns to write whole pages that sound like a friend who reads widely and sleeps little. A painter asks a cloud of numbers to try a new palette. A farmer points a phone at a row and learns which plant needs water now rather than tomorrow. A clerk feeds a contract to software that flags the line that once hid the fee. The engines are quick and often right, and people argue at supper about what belongs to invention and what belongs to the hand. Whether craft will thin or deepen under this light remains a door that swings on soft hinges. Rockets rise and return on columns of steam, the legs touching a barge as lightly as a heron lands in marsh water. A rover wheels over a red plain and sends a breath of grit sound through distant microphones that make the cold planet feel close. A telescope unfolds a golden eye and returns a nursery of stars that look like spinning pollen in a summer shaft of sun. On a spring afternoon, the moon pulls a dark ribbon across the land, and people step into streets wearing paper glasses and pointing as if a new bird had come to town. A churchyard grows crowded with families, sharing the same hush and the same cheers. Years earlier, a court had signed a permission that let more homes match their hope, and a courthouse lawn filled with confetti that fell into damp grass like blessings. At kitchen tables, entrepreneurs stitch businesses from thrift and courage, tutoring on weeknights and shipping handmade soap on Saturdays. A veteran opens a small cafe and hangs a photograph of the crew that taught him to keep a schedule he still trusts. A librarian hosts a story hour on a porch and sends a book to the next address with a note tucked under the cover. A contractor rebuilds a neighbor's steps and refuses payment, asking only for a pie in the fall when apples come in. The old ways of looking out for one another keep their shape under fluorescent light and under moonlight alike. There are other rooms you know well. A hospital waiting area where a vending machine hums and coffee tastes thin while someone you love sleeps under a blanket warmed in a metal drawer. A voting place in a gym that smells of varnish where the same volunteers have folded the same signs for years. A county fairground where friars pop and a quilt gleams like stained glass in afternoon sun. Flags ripple from porches and from pickup beds and from wheelchairs at parades. The meanings stitched into those stripes and stars gather and clash and soften and gather again, like tides that need no permission to come and go. Phones buzz, feeds flow. A story runs hard in one direction, then turns, then becomes another story entirely. Friends sit on the same couch and live in two worlds that share a wall and seldom trade a map. Teachers ask students to close laptops and count to 10 before speaking. Pastors and coaches and aunties teach the same quiet habit. Whether the republic can keep its common room warm when every hand tends a different fire stays an open line. Not bleak, not rosy, simply unfinished. On some nights, small towns seem brighter than cities. A high school gym rocks under a Friday band, and the sound bounces off banners won by jump shots and mile splits. The anthem breathes from 100 throats that know one another's names. In cities, a park glows with lanterns, and a class practices Tai Chi, while a mariachi trumpet paints the air 2 paths away. Food trucks scatter cumin and coffee and cinnamon into the cool. Strangers hold the same bench and nod. It is easy to believe, in moments like this, that the noisier currents will never sweep the banks away. Morning returns to show that the work remains. New jobs arrive that no one imagined in their grandparents' time, and old jobs fade that formed the bones of whole places. A farmhouse lists, a library opens, a bridge needs welding, a choir adds a part. The country listens for what character tomorrow will demand. It gathers from the past what still works: duty, thrift, neighborliness, faith kept without insistence. It carries forward from the present what has proven good: wider welcome, clearer air, a hand that reaches across difference. The path refuses to become a straight line. It moves like a river, curving by bedrock and sandbar and sudden storms, and you walk beside it, steady in the rhythm you learned many chapters ago, feeling the restlessness as proof that the heart still beats. Night folds softly over porches and rooftops, and windows dim one by one until the town becomes a quiet constellation that lingers just above the grass. Streets remember footsteps and then let them go. The last shop bell gives a small farewell, and the door eases shut, leaving the faint perfume of paper, wood, and the day's last coin warmed by a palm. Far out in fields, the crickets begin their even music, and a slow wind moves through corn and fence wire with a whisper that never asks for an answer. You walk along an old stone wall and feel the heat of the day slip from it in gentle breaths. A gate opens to a forgotten garden where thyme pushes through broken brick and a pear tree leans kindly over a bench that still holds the shape of someone who once sat and read in late afternoon. The past feels close here, not as noise, but as companionship. An elder sitting nearby with good posture and patient eyes. You sit as well, and the bench receives you the way a harbor receives a small boat after weather. Across the valley, a church steeple fades into the dark and keeps its bell quiet. A flag lowers on a single rope and rests without fuss. Lamps in kitchens glow like cups of tea left to cool. Somewhere a screen door taps and then settles. Somewhere a train turns a far curve and leaves only a thin silver ribbon of sound that floats and disappears. Every road you walk tonight narrows to a path of starlight that leads toward rest. Your breath slows. The rooms of history close their shutters and put their ledgers away. The land holds you the way it has held generations, with a steady hand and a warmth that does not need to be named. You gather yourself into the gentle hush, into clean sheets and the faint scent of rain on dust, and now you may drift into dreams of history. End of script. Sweet dreams.